Hello and welcome to the 125th edition of Australia's Climate Wars, or as we like to call it, the Duttoning.
The climate wars are back.
Peter Dutton signals the coalition will scrap Australia's 2030 climate target.
So, how did we get here?
N'entend pas d'objection. L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
Back in 2016, the coalition government signed Australia up to the Paris Agreement.
A record number of countries signed the historic Paris Accord to slow global warming.
Every signatory country has its own responsibilities.
In December 2015, almost every country in the world signed on to a legally binding agreement to keep the global surface temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. To do so meant almost halving emissions by 2030, something Australia has legislated.
And reach net zero by 2050. Net zero is the goal, but the agreement also included the interim targets because the whole point is a gradual transition.
Together we can end the climate wars.
In 2022, Labor took those reduction targets, improved the 2031 to 43%, which scientists think is the bare minimum, and legislated them.
The Australian people voted for action on climate change, and today the Albanese government delivered action on climate change.
But the coalition has never been particularly comfortable with the Paris Agreement. And while it was the party that signed us up in the first place, it didn't exactly have a plan to reach it.
Asking Australians for trust on his biggest gamble yet, a nuclear-powered future.
The coalition is now basically arguing, oh, we're definitely going to reach net zero by 2050, so why worry about whatever happens between now and then?
What we're saying is that we won't have a linear pathway. There will be a ramp up at the end in us achieving that goal of net zero by 2050. We just don't need to achieve it by 2030, which is what this mob's trying to do.
Sure. The thing is, though, you can't just focus on 2050 and meet your obligations under the Paris Agreement. It's not how it works. If you don't have an interim target, you're not meeting your Paris commitment. It's as simple as that.
The Paris Accord's very clear. You can't backslide. You can't reduce your commitments.
For Peter Dutton to walk away from any 2030 commitment, to be clear, is walking away from the Paris Agreement.
We're not going to send the economy into free fall and families bankrupt through an ideologically based approach.
Dutton is banking on the cost of living argument trumping climate sense. It's the $100 lamb roast all over again.
It'll be the end of our sheep industry. I don't think your working mothers are going to be very happy when they're paying over $100 for a roast.
So what's the play here? At the moment, it's all about distraction. Under Peter Dutton, the coalition had promised a new energy policy, one with nuclear power as its centrepiece. But so far, there's no sign of it beyond talking points. And so Dutton is reaching back into the playbook. And if this sounds familiar...
The Labor Party can try and please people in Paris. My job is to take care of the Australian people.
It might be because it sounds like a cover version of this classic track.
I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
Just in case it needs to be said, Paris was where the global agreement was signed. The agreement is not controlled by the people of Paris.
If Donald Trump's elected president of the United States in November, then internationally that could throw a real spanner in the works of the Paris Agreement.
Dutton is working to keep his party together, and there are elements in the coalition who have never been comfortable with any climate action. And they're not afraid to let the world know.
I think we should get out of this whole ridiculous facade.
He's also hoping that by tying cost of living to the energy transition, he can win the hearts and minds of Australians struggling to make their way through this economy.
I'm not going to sign up to an arrangement that destroys our economy and sends families and small businesses into bankruptcy.
It's not true or even that simple, but it rarely is. Dutton's plan is to create a new big bad by pointing to hallmark government policies and telling you that's the reason you're struggling to get by.
But how much higher will your electricity prices go under this Prime Minister?
Dutton thinks he's in with a chance with this line, particularly in the outer suburban seats and regional areas where the coalition can make things uncomfortable for Labor MPs. But Dutton isn't facing the same voters where this all worked 10 years ago. increasingly devastating natural disasters, better education, and an international and scientific consensus about where the world's climate is heading has changed the field of play. And most importantly, this is not Australian voters' first time at the climate rodeo. Dutton might have convinced his party room, but convincing voters, that's a whole other ballgame.